What if I told you that the most iconic landmark in Paris, the Eiffel Tower, was once sold for scrap metal? And what if I told you that after selling it, the con man who pulled it off went back and did it all over again? This isn't the plot of a heist film. This is the true story of one of the most brilliant, audacious, and charismatic criminals who ever lived. A man who operated on a level of deception so grand it became legendary. He was known by over 45 aliases, spoke 5 languages fluently, and possessed a preternatural understanding of human psychology. His name was Victor Lustig, but he was best known as the Count, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice. To understand how anyone could pull off such an impossible feat, you first have to understand the man himself. Victor Lustig was born in 1890 in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in what is now the Czech Republic. From a young age, he was remarkably intelligent, a quick study, and gifted with languages. But he wasn't interested in a conventional life. He was drawn to the thrill of the grift, the art of the con. His university was not a hall of ivy, but the smoky, opulent interiors of transatlantic ocean liners crisscrossing the Atlantic. In the early 20th century, these ships were floating cities of wealth, carrying rich industrialists, celebrities, and old money aristocrats. For Lustig, they were a captive audience, a sea of potential marks. He honed his skills here, learning to read people, to spot their weaknesses, their greed, and their desires. He posed as a Broadway producer or a wealthy count, his impeccable manners and expensive clothes disarming even the most cynical travelers. One of his signature scams from this era was the Romanian money box. It was a small, ornate cedar box that he claimed was a counterfeiting machine. He would demonstrate it for a wealthy mark, inserting a blank piece of paper and a real $100 bill. Then, after a series of elaborate chemical treatments and the turning of knobs, the machine would, hours later, spit out a second, seemingly perfect $100 bill. The mark would be astounded. Of course, the box was a sham. Lustig had simply hidden a second real bill inside the mechanism. But the demonstration was so convincing, the desire for easy money so powerful, that his victims would beg him to sell the machine. Lustig would feign reluctance, claiming it was too dangerous, before finally agreeing to part with it for a massive sum, often as high as $30,000. He would then hand over the box, along with a polite warning that it took 12 hours to produce a single bill, giving him ample time to disappear long before the new owner discovered they had purchased an empty wooden box. This was Lustig's genius. He didn't just sell a product, he sold a fantasy. He understood that greed is a powerful blinder. After World War I, with the transatlantic travel business disrupted, Lustig set his sights on a new playground, Paris. The Paris of 1925 was a city in flux. The Roaring Twenties were in full swing, a whirlwind of jazz, art, and post-war exuberance. But beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. The war had left scars on the economy and the national psyche, and in the center of it all stood the Eiffel Tower. Today, it's a beloved symbol of France, but in 1925, its future was far from certain. The tower had been built as a temporary structure for the 1889 World's Fair. It was never meant to be permanent. For decades, many Parisians, particularly those in the artistic community, had decried it as a monstrous eyesore, a useless metal skeleton blighting the city's beautiful skyline. By the mid-1920s, the tower was in a state of disrepair. It needed a new coat of paint, extensive maintenance, and the costs were astronomical for the post-war government. The French press was filled with articles and heated debates about its fate. Should the city invest a fortune to maintain this controversial structure, or should they simply tear it down? It was one of these newspaper articles that sparked the most audacious idea of Lustig's career. As he sat in his Parisian hotel room, reading about the city's struggles with the tower, a plan of impossible scale began to form in his mind. The government was talking about tearing it down. The public was debating it. The situation was plausible, so why not take advantage of it? He wasn't going to sell a money box. He was going to sell the Eiffel Tower itself. The first step was to establish his credibility. Lustig was a master of appearances. He had official-looking government stationery forged, creating documents that identified him as the Deputy Director General of the Ministère de Postes et Télégraphes, the ministry which, at the time, was responsible for the tower. He then booked a suite at one of the most exclusive and expensive hotels in Paris, the Hôtel de Crillon. This wasn't just about luxury, it was a strategic choice. The Crillon was a known hub for diplomats, politicians, and high-stakes government business. Meeting there would lend his scheme an immediate air of legitimacy. Next, he needed his victims. He carefully researched and identified the 5 biggest scrap metal dealers in the city. Using his forged stationery, he sent each of them an official, confidential invitation. The letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic language, hinting at a discreet but highly lucrative government contract, and summoning them to a private meeting at his suite in the Hôtel de Crillon. The bait was set. The 5 dealers arrived at the hotel, a mix of curiosity and anticipation. They were led into Lustig's opulent suite, where he greeted them not with flashy charm, but with the world-weary sigh of an overworked government official. He let them sit for a moment, building the tension, before he began his speech. He told them he had brought them together for a sensitive matter. The government, he explained in grave tones, had made a difficult decision. The maintenance costs for the Eiffel Tower had become unsustainable. The political and public backlash over its continued existence was growing. Therefore, the state had secretly decided to dismantle and sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap. He paused, letting the sheer shock of the announcement sink in. Then came the masterstroke. He stressed that this information was highly confidential. The government feared a massive public outcry if the news leaked before the deal was finalized. Therefore, the entire process had to be conducted in absolute secrecy. This single instruction was the key to the entire con. By swearing the dealers to secrecy, he effectively prevented them from contacting anyone in the actual government to verify the story. He had created a closed loop of information, with himself as the sole gatekeeper. He informed them that they, as the most reputable dealers in Paris, were being given the exclusive opportunity to bid on the 7,300 tons of high-quality metal. He then arranged for a limousine to take them all on an inspection tour of the tower, where he flashed a fake government pass to get them access to areas not open to the public, further solidifying his authority. As he observed the men, Lustig used his keen insight into human nature to select his primary mark. His eyes settled on a man named Andre Poisson. Poisson was a successful dealer, but he was new to the upper echelons of Parisian business. He was insecure, eager to prove himself, and desperate to be seen as a major player. Lustig recognized the scent of ambition and saw a man who wanted to believe. A few days later, the bids came in. Lustig reviewed them and informed Andre Poisson that he was the winning bidder, but the deal wasn't closed yet. Poisson, despite his eagerness, was still plagued by doubts. His wife was particularly suspicious. Why all the secrecy? Why was a government deal being conducted in a hotel suite instead of an official ministry building? The whole thing felt rushed and unorthodox. Poisson shared these concerns with Lustig during a follow-up meeting. A lesser con man might have panicked, but Lustig saw this not as a problem, but as the final, crucial opportunity to set the hook. He looked at Poisson with a pained expression. He leaned in conspiratorially and confessed the real reason for the secrecy and haste. Being a government minister, he confided, was a noble calling, but it did not pay well. He was a man with a refined taste for the finer things in life, but his salary barely covered his expenses. He implied that to navigate the tricky bureaucracy of a deal this large, a little extra lubrication was often required to ensure things went smoothly. He was, in essence, asking for a bribe. This was the moment of pure genius. For a man like Andre Poisson, accustomed to the often corrupt world of business and politics, a government official asking for a bribe wasn't a red flag. On the contrary, it was a green light. It was familiar. It made the whole unbelievable story suddenly feel completely, utterly real. Corrupt officials were a known quantity. This one small, greasy detail erased all of Poisson's remaining doubts. Convinced he was now on the inside of a slightly shady but legitimate government deal, Poisson handed over the bribe in cash, a substantial sum to grease the wheels. He then secured a banker's draft for the main payment for the scrap rights to the Eiffel Tower. Lustig accepted the money with the solemn gravity of a state official, assured Poisson the deal was done, and told him to await further instructions. As soon as Poisson was out the door, Lustig sprang into action. He didn't wait. He didn't celebrate. He cashed the banker's draft immediately, packed a suitcase with all the money, and took the first available train out of Paris, heading straight for Vienna, Austria. In Vienna, Lustig lived like a king. He checked into a luxury hotel and enjoyed the fruits of his monumental scam. But every single day, he would anxiously scan the international pages of the Parisian newspapers. He was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting to see his name, his description, his crime splashed across every front page in Europe. He expected to become the most wanted man in the world. But the days turned into a week and then a month, and there was nothing. Not a single word. Silence. Lustig had made one final, brilliant calculation. He hadn't just bet on Poisson's greed. He had bet on his shame. He knew that once Poisson discovered he'd been duped, he would be faced with a terrible choice. He could go to the police and admit that he, a supposedly savvy businessman, had been tricked into buying the Eiffel Tower. He would become a national laughingstock, his career and reputation utterly destroyed. Or he could swallow the massive financial loss and pretend it never happened. Lustig gambled on shame being more powerful than anger, and he was right. Andre Poisson was too humiliated to ever report the crime. Realizing his masterpiece of a con had gone completely unreported, a thought even more audacious than the original began to form in Lustig's mind. If it worked once so perfectly, why couldn't it work again? The perfect crime deserved an encore. So, about a month later, Victor Lustig returned to Paris. He checked back into the Hotel de Crillon, printed a new batch of forged government stationery, and drew up a new list of the city's top scrap metal dealers. He invited a new group of 5 men to his suite and performed the exact same script. He was the weary official. The tower was too expensive to maintain. The government was secretly selling it for scrap. The deal required absolute discretion. The con was back on. Incredibly, it almost worked a second time. He found a new, eager mark among the group and began reeling him in. He went through the same process of negotiation, the same subtle hints of corruption. Everything was proceeding according to plan. However, this time, his chosen victim was more cautious. Just as the deal was about to be finalized, the dealer's suspicion got the better of him. He made a quiet inquiry with the police. The moment the authorities heard the story, they knew exactly what was happening. They had received whispers of a similar rumor a month prior, though no official complaint had ever been filed. Now, they had their man in their sights, but Lustig had an uncanny sixth sense for danger. Whether he was tipped off or simply felt the tide turning against him, he smelled the trap just before it was sprung. He grabbed his money and fled, making it out of France just as the police were closing in. He boarded a ship and set sail for the United States, leaving the legend of the man who sold the Eiffel Tower behind him in Paris. In America, Lustig continued his career as a master criminal, reaching new heights of infamy. He embarked on a massive counterfeiting operation, producing near-perfect $100 bills known as Lustig bills. His operation was so prolific, and the fakes so good that they were considered a genuine threat to the stability of the American currency. Secret Service agents were tasked with hunting him down as a matter of national security. He even famously crossed paths with the most feared gangster in America, Al Capone. Lustig approached Capone with a proposition, convincing the mob boss to invest $50,000 in a stock scheme. Lustig simply put Capone's money in a safe deposit box and did nothing with it. 2 months later, he returned to Capone, apologized profusely, and said the deal had fallen through. He handed back the full $50,000. Capone, who had expected Lustig to either double the money or disappear with it entirely, was stunned by this apparent honesty. "I knew you were a con man," Capone allegedly said, "but I thought you were an honest con man." Impressed by his nerve, Capone handed Lustig $5,000 as a reward. That was the entire point of the con. Lustig had conned one of the most dangerous men alive out of $5,000 simply by appealing to his ego. But Lustig's luck eventually ran out. It wasn't the Eiffel Tower or his dealings with the mob that brought him down. It was his counterfeiting scheme and a jealous mistress who betrayed him to the FBI. He was finally arrested in 1935. True to form, he managed a daring escape from the supposedly escape-proof federal detention headquarters in New York City a day before his trial, using a rope made of bedsheets. But he was recaptured less than a month later in Pittsburgh. This time, there would be no escape. Victor Lustig was sentenced to 20 years in the most notorious prison in the world, Alcatraz. On that desolate rock in San Francisco Bay, the man who had lived a life of ultimate freedom, charm, and illusion was reduced to a number. He died in 1947 from complications of pneumonia, a quiet end for a man who had lived such a loud life. Victor Lustig's legacy is a testament to the power of audacity. He operated under a set of rules he called the 10 Commandments for con men, which included principles like be a patient listener, never look bored, and never get drunk. He was a psychologist, an actor, and a strategist. He didn't just break the rules, he exploited them. The story of how he sold the Eiffel Tower isn't just a tale of a clever crime. It's a story about human nature. Lustig understood that people don't buy a story just because it's believable. They buy it because they want asterisk to believe it. He sold his victims a fantasy of wealth, of importance, of being on the inside. He wasn't just selling 7,300 tons of iron. He was selling a dream. And for that, people were willing to pay any price. He remains, to this day, the undisputed king of the con, an artist whose canvas was credibility and whose masterpiece was a tower in the heart of Paris.